Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around doing something in the world. I am your host, Florence Adu. I'm coming to you from Accra, Ghana. And in recognition of what has become International Cannabis Appreciation Day, or 420, my guest today is the CEO of Medicanja, which is a medical cannabis production and distribution company based in Kingston, Jamaica. I'm so excited. So I've had a guest who is from Jamaica in Ghana. So this time I get to travel to Jamaica. He comes to this role as an expert in supply chain and demand planning systems in large-scale manufacturing environments, particularly in the food and beverage industries. Andray, Mckenzie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Florence. Really nice to be on with you. Really excited to share in and certainly reaching out to your audience and to be part of this experience.
Wonderful, wonderful. Welcome. So let's just jump right in. So tell us more about where you're from, where you are local, and what is your craft?
Okay, sure. All right. So I am based in Kingston, Jamaica, but I actually was born and grew up in Westmoreland, which is the western end, close to Negril, which is one of the tourist spots in Jamaica. I grew up also in terms of close to the big heritage of our historical part of Jamaica, which is close to the Froome sugar plantation, which is the largest sugar production company certainly in Jamaica. So it's certainly in terms of I grew up in that farming belt. My family has been associated with that in terms of they working at the factory as well as, in the community. So that's largely my experience. I spent my childhood years there, after I leave high school. This was when I came to Kingston. And I came to Kingston, spent a year with one of my uncles downtown. Until then, I started to move into trying to getting into the tertiary education, trying to work at the same time and try to balance that. So a large part of that has been really in terms of that experience, that transition from it's two actual parallels because I'm growing up. I'm accustomed to open range, just being out there in terms of there's no grills or lockdown or it's an open community. It's a lot of family on one street, one location. Your neighbor is your family and your friend. You know everybody. You know their parents, everybody, and you came to an environment in which, hey, once it gets dark, you're told that, hey, you need to be inside. So it was a big difference in terms of making that adjustment. Really, in terms of that background, growing up in rural agriculture, Jamaica, and then coming into the city and then making it that transition. So Kingston has been in my home since then. Certainly I visit and Westmoreland and so forth, but Kingston has been my home since then.
Okay. So what part of Kingston are you in?
All right. At this point, I'm in Kingston, which is close to Halfway. Halfway is actually St. Andrew. So you have Kingston and St. Andrew. Okay. Right. Okay. So I think that is because most people, when you say Kingston, but Kingston is actually the smallest parish, but St. Andrew, but usually you say Kingston and St. Andrew. So I'm in the St. Andrew part of the city. Okay. And I live very close to Halfway, New Kingston area.
Okay. I've been to Jamaica once. I loved it. And so I spent a New Year a couple of years ago in Kingston. It was quiet, but then we went to Ocho Rios. So that's where I spent the larger amount of time.
So you've been to Duns River Falls when you went there?
Yes.
Duns River Falls is one of those really attractions that anchors Jamaica. That when you talk to tourists, they always talk about Duns River Falls. But certainly Jamaica. I welcome you back and your audience to come to Jamaica because I think oftentimes when people, it's either just the core Montego Bay or Kingston that you hear about, but Jamaica really have lovely attractions all over. And I certainly think that is something that when you come and you explore the island. That experience stays with you,
Yeah.
and I've had persons who came down. We have to meetings, and they took some time and go off and explore the island, and and I think that they fell in love with it,
Yeah, it's definitely,
yeah.
definitely, definitely lovable. So tell us, how does a rural young man from Westmoreland make it to become a supply chain logistics expert? How did that happen? How did you get into that as your thing before becoming a CEO?
Yeah, okay. So I think it's one of those experiences, or one of those parts where sometimes in life you go on a path and it takes you down a road, and you can go with it. You can let others be in terms of the, and of course you're going to be influenced by people you come in touch with. But also it's part of that journey that if you have that mindset where you're going on a journey, but also you try to get the fullness of that experience. And,
Mm-hmm.
and, and so I started out there because when I came to Kingston, I went to a community college to study computing. And as part of that program, I was sent on a 6 week training program at Deno and Geddes, which is then later rebranded as Red Stripe. And as part of that experience, I was able to connect with persons there. And before the program finished, they actually offered me a job there in that organization. I actually got a letter in the mail. Back then it was you got physical letter, not emails. And yeah, they offered me a job to come back and work as part of their summer internship program. And I was like, wow, because I know I did well and I know I got good recommendations from the program, but certainly, and it has been a journey since then because from there, I managed, we had the opportunity to say, okay, do I go back to school full time? Do I continue in there? And I was able to continue with the organization, continue with them while doing tertiary, and that's why it's also part important that there are some and I get back to the journey, but I just interject to say sometimes I come across people, especially young people in organization, and it's part of that story that you have to tell them is that you have to be able to focus and know what you want and have a long-term vision of what you want to do, because you can come across these opportunities and you just treat them in terms of what you know. But I was able to use that experience being there. Started out as a warehouse clerk in terms of my first role there. uh, Continues going to pursuing tertiary education and be along that journey. And before within my first year there, I remember in terms of I was promoted 3 times. Sorry, my first 3 years I was promoted 3 times. And as part of that is just because they keep telling us that you have to have the right attitude, and it's not so much about what you know, because I wasn't hired there because I was an expert. Today I can say yes, I'm an expert in the system, but back then, it was just having the right attitude, having that willingness to learn and that willingness to do things. So that really led me into that organization, and from then, both continuing privately my pursuing tertiary education and internally being part of their development programs, I was able to build on those, and I managed to move from where I was clerk to inventory control. Then I was a team leader, and pretty soon after that, I found myself being the part of a number of projects, and so that is one of the things. Also, after a while, because it really got stressful at some point when you're being pulled for every project that is coming, people are pulling on you. And I always remember one of my I was talking to one of my colleagues, and he was saying, well, I said, I feel that this is getting too pressuring, because I don't think they realize also that I'm pursuing tertiary education outside of work. So, that bandwidth to continue along that journey. And he said, no, no, no. It's because they recognize that you get it done. And once you're part of the project, you have that mindset where you're going to go and do it. I,
Mm.
and I took, I stopped and I said, wow, because sometimes it's not that I was unwilling or was lacking motivation, but I thought, you were being some. And I must come in terms of growing up in the Red Stripe system. They do have fantastic people who have passed through that organization, people who would support you. And I remember also speaking with Marie Hemmings. She was one of the HR managers at the time. And she said, Andre, you are going to be part of this organization in terms of that transition. And part of why we're pushing you, it's part of it is to get you in terms of to see what you are made of, but at the same time, it's for you to in turn to show people that because you might be young, but the reality is that with the changing technology, the changing environment, by then Red Stripe was acquired by Diageo, which is a large spirit company in the UK. And the part of that transition really meant that there was a lot of changes coming, a lot of things. And sometimes, when you have organizations, today Red Stripe is more than 100 years old, but it is one of the oldest companies in Jamaica. But you have a lot of institutional knowledge, a lot of persons there, but you have to make that leap. And as one of those companies had to go into that leap, and it's part of that change. So it's important that people understand and recognize that it's not about just going somewhere and working. It's about how do you become part of that institution in terms of being part of that. You grow, the company grow in terms of, and you build that organization, because you're just there to collect a paycheck doesn't really serve anybody in the long run. All right.
Right.
And after a while, you're going to lack motivation as to why in terms of that. So to focus on in terms of the experience part, because a lot of that in terms of professional, but also in terms of that connection, is that I was privileged to be part of, as I mentioned, a number of projects that were initially core in supply chain. I was promoted to the materials planning manager in 2014. And that role, again, it's a matter of not just going into a role and trying to assume that, okay, this is my job or what I do. As part of that, I was in charge of scheduling and bringing in materials for the factory and the entire supply chain, distribution, planning. And what we found was that the country went into a recession about a year and a half into the role. And what happened was that when I went into the role, we were under so much pressure to keep up with demand. And within 18 months, it was the opposite. You now have millions of dollars, millions of US dollars worth of inventory and stuff coming in, sitting down, not being consumed. It was just there as part of it. My team and the commercial team, we have our clashes around that. Hey, you're forecasting too much. Its supply chain is not what we're buying. We're spending on the wrong SKUs in terms of what is there. And I remember the then supply director, Andy Jones, he was part of a meeting that we were having. And then afterwards, he called me and he said, Andre, I know what the problem is. You guys lack that a single process that aligns everybody. And I know somebody who can help you on this. And I said, well, sure. And he through his network, he got a gentleman. I don't remember his name, but I know he was from the UK, and he came down and we met. Over a week, we looked through the entire system, and he said, and he showed me some techniques. And so what I started to do was I using Excel, and I started to basically do my own forecast based on the data that was there, and try to plan around that. So when we were having our meetings now, I was able to, I shared it, and I've always been that type of person where I will share the data, but if it is that I realize that people are still set on their part, then that's where I will challenge it in terms of to say. And so we started having those clashes around it, and then eventually people start to listen to what I was saying, because they said, hey, this was more consistent with what was actually happening versus what was the wish in terms of what is there. And so from that role, I went on to actually become part of a process called the sales and operation planning, which was first a project that's tried to bring that cohesion to the business in terms of balancing supply and demand. And from that role, once that project was finished, I became the sales and operation planning manager, which was now in charge of the doing both the commercial side of the business and the supply chain in terms of managing that. And through that experience, I started to get a lot more involved in commercial planning, starting to see the marketing side of it, getting into, not just how we manage the internal system, but how do we also manage the external system. As part of that, I got exposed to trade intelligence, how to use that type of data in terms of using the what the consumer is saying, what are the trends, And then also as part of that, as I build up my experience and was able to contribute in different areas, then also that become part of, when the company found that, okay, well, beer sales is going down. People are no longer consuming a lot of beer as they used to. And so we start to brainstorm and start to look at how do we then make beer relevant as part of that and so forth. And then I became part of the overarching a cross-functional committee was the innovations committee, which was really now looking at taking persons from different part of the organization, but not just locally, but also we had persons from Mexico, persons from the US, persons from the UK, start to look at it from a more holistic factor. And one of the things that certainly in terms of the data showed in Jamaica, which was that most of the persons who are finishing tertiary institutions are women. All right. As a matter of fact, at the time when we did the data, it was 80 plus percent. I'm sure it's probably higher now in terms of what is there. So that is, you look at that and those statistics and you said, hey, what is happening is that there is the transition where women are really going to become more of the breadwinners and the decision makers in terms of organizations and structure of what is happening down the road. And so what you have is that a lot of men, of course, men still control or still are in the dominant position historically. It will take a while before those roles become phased out in terms of and the new leadership based on capability will naturally, if you have more women who are coming up and going through the rigor, then certainly that will become a factor. But the key insights that we took from it there, and I must comment also in terms of Red Stripe, because they had a gender policy from the years on in terms of trying to ensure that there's a certain percentage of women that were involved in the management, but not just in terms of being employed, but also in management roles. So I came out of that mindset knowing that, okay, this is how organization right. It's not about trying to force the change in other area, but this is how it's the natural order. But to go back to the insight that we took from that, it's really it's a matter of trying to identify not just planning internally, and this ties back both to supply chain and demand planning, is that you can't just look at what you have. All right, you can't just look at just the competition. You can't just look at in terms of what the limitations are. You have to look at it in the sense of saying that what do you want to achieve? Where do you want to go in terms of and you build on that. There's what we call blue ocean strategy. That's really it's a very important, very insightful. And what it says is that it's not about creating everything in terms of and trying to fight with the competition. It's about trying to identify, even within your existing portfolio, a new market, trying to position yourself in an area that fill a need, and that those needs in terms of will address and bring in new consumers that you never thought you had before. And so as part of that, we started to look at it and we started to come up with flavored beers. And,
more appealing.
Appealing to women, because but also the taste was not, women didn't like the beer taste, but
Sure.
I always recall having a conversation in which when they did a mock-up, and when we went back to did the consumer the profile test, the marketing folks were saying, no, it's not sweet enough. The ladies didn't like it and stuff like that. And I was like, look, what do you want me to do? I can just make some lemonade and pour some beer on it. And is that what you want in terms of, because it's not there in his head. Yeah, and so we had that experience, but in the end, you have to listen to your consumers, and
Yeah.
you have to recognize that sometimes, yes, you want to make a product that is traditional. You want to make that, to have that core to say, okay, this is it. And but if you don't have a consumer for it, it's not. It's just going to be a nice innovation or a nice creation.
Yeah.
And so we actually went through several iterations of creating that, and I can tell you certainly, when I was leaving, we did the sorrel beer. Sorrel is a flower that really is popular in Jamaica in terms of and it certainly did well. We actually said, okay, we're going to do it for Christmas, but it did so well that we decided to continue with it.
Mm.
Yeah, and the next year, so we actually had the sorrel plan for Christmas, and then we were going to make in terms of a lemon for summer. And but people kept demanding the sorrel in terms of, the demand was just there, so we kept doing it. And even when we launched the lemon, the marketing guys were saying, look, it's not going to do well because you can't have two innovation to the same product at the same time. But actually, it really went well, and to the point of which both products were so much in high demand in terms of trying to keep up with that.
Right. 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 Right.
And so when you look at it, but also, and I when we look at how those products were designed and set up to actually, and to see what the target audience we started with. But what you actually start to look at the data, you realize that men were also buying the product. And so while
Mm.
you were trying to design to say, okay, I'm going to get into the on top part of, addressing women and trying to give them a product that is, it's certainly, with the other way, where you realize now that it just had a broad appeal, because people know, because it wasn't also as strong, people would drink it at lunchtime in terms of it's a nice beer,
Mm. More
refreshing. But
versatile in
yeah,
general.
yeah,
Hmm.
but also in terms of the flavor was very, in terms of the Jamaican palate, certainly,
Mm-hmm.
so
Hmm.
it certainly became part of that now in terms of, so working with those projects. I mean, in with doing those projects as well, and I guess that's where, because after a while, because I had the supply chain background, I was into the demand and commercial planning as well. It became just a natural part of where, again, I became part of the institution and all of those projects in terms of what is there. So even while we were doing those projects, we had other projects we ran. We had, where Red Stripe took over as part of that partnership with Diageo. We start to sell and distribute Johnny Walker, Bailey.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
a lot of those international brands. Sure, vodka was also one of them. And so, as part of that, we still have to ensure that, as part of that planning, planning with that insight to say, okay, how are you going to target these, where you're going to position these products? Because you can't, and it's one of those things where I see that very obvious in when you look at a large corporation versus small business, and in terms of engaging personal small business. In small business, I have an idea, I like it, I'm going to go and do it. In the corporation, you realize that it's not about just because this look nice. You have to anchor that in terms of in terms of how you're going to position, where are you going to make sure that you have a complete plan before you
Mhm.
go ahead and start to spend money on these projects, because it is very costly, and not
Mhm.
only in terms of just money, but in terms of time, how you could, the opportunity cost of how you could redirect some of those resources. It's
Mhm.
certainly,
Right.
uh,
So let me pivot a little bit and ask my why the where, but I'll put a little spin on it because you've kind of told us how you came to be living and working and playing where you currently live in Kingston. But let's put it a little bit of a spin to why the where with your moving to Medicanja, because
okay.
you had this a great career at Red Stripe and working with, in the transition to Diageo. And now
Yeah.
you've come to this new industry that
Yeah.
has a lot of history. So tell us more about why the where in that.
Why the okay? So it was a situation in which, as I said, that I've had this experience, but also, I started out there, but I was approaching and I said, wow, but I'm here in this organization for almost 20 years. It came to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to look at it, but I said, what next? Because I don't want to be just one organization in terms of the world, because
Sure.
it's a fantastic place. And there are challenges, but certainly there are things that you grew up. I literally grew up there, if you want to call it there, because I started out at 19. So I literally grew up in terms of in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so I start to look at what's next. How do I, and as part of that, I've explored options of, okay, do I go into one of the expat program? There are lots of regional, project. I was approached to be part of a regional project, but it still felt it's the same thing, you know. And as part of that, also, I said, okay, there must be something else in terms of. So I started to work with the organization, and we start to set on a transition plan. And I said, hey, I don't see myself here for more than another 2 years in terms of, so I didn't get up and resign in terms of what is there. I had that honest conversation, and, they also put back to me a couple of other proposals, and right up to the week before I left, they did offer me another role to remain within the organization. But I felt at the time that it was long enough being a part of that organization. I wanted to do something new. I wanted to, get a different experience. And even though while being there, you would work and do other things in terms of, but it still didn't feel like as if that it would be something completely different in terms of. And so that's part of why I said we went on that journey. So when I actually set out on starting, and I started doing it, and I wanted to set up an e-commerce company, started out planning, started to get software done, build the organization around that. But sometimes, it's a matter of, again, I started out by saying sometimes you go down the road and sometimes things come your way, and the path in terms of how it is. Because when I started doing that journey, I never envisioned being part of Medicanja, or knowing Dr. Henry Lowe, who is the founder, and really in terms of the brains behind the organization in terms of creating these fantastic products. And so our path actually came across through a mutual person. Who's actually a colleague of mine who has a daughter who's an executive with Dr. Lowe's team. And through we were business partners, having some discussion, and he shared with me and said, hey, my daughter is telling me that there is this fun set of Dr. Henry Lowe, and he has all these products that he really needs somebody to come in and push him, because he is big on the in terms of the creative side and create and but I said, okay, I we were there, and I said, let me see what he's offering, because at the time I was saying, okay, well, maybe we could probably retail it as part of what the plan that we're doing in terms of trying to set up our business and trying to look at it from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so I met with Dr. Henry Lowe and Dr. Trevor Hamilton, who were two of the board members for Medicanja. And from that first meeting, they called me back and they said, wow, because when I introduced myself, they were like, but the thing is, they were having a similar conversation. They were wondering who could they bring on board to help with this, because they know in terms of having the products there is one thing, but without somebody who understands how to mobilize from the getting the product produced and also how to get it to market. And so they were very much interested in terms of what. And so we were having just conversations around it until they actually said, okay, look, Andre, I think you can do more with us than just being a customer to retail and stuff. I think in terms of from your corporate experience and in terms of what is there, we see where this really, in terms of you come on board and partner with us, we could really make this into a global company. And I said, so I started to give some thought. They gave me some material more. I studied more about the products, try to understand the industry a little bit more in terms of, and I just said, look, don't worry. And I said, look, I have no experience in this cannabis space in terms of the industry. So actually, when I look at the data, and I said, what I saw is the big comparison because I'm coming from alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Exactly.
said it is highly regulated. All what I'm seeing here is that alcohol is just a few years ahead of
Yes.
working the cannabis industry because it's
Mm-hmm.
going to head in the same direction in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So while at this point there are lots of regulations, a lot of no in terms of that fear or the stigma and the lack of education that is out there around how you use the product, you do realize and recognize that there is actually just a different state. And when I made that connection, I'd say, hey, but it's not that big of a difference. It's just a matter of in terms of having this. And again, if we have the right people for the right roles, because I'm not a subject matter expert in every area, and I have to recognize that. But that is where also I said, hey, coming out of an organization where you didn't have to be a subject matter expert in the area because that is why you're bringing consultants, you're bringing people to work in specialized areas, you have your engineers and so forth. So there is no shame in saying, hey, look, I'm not a subject matter expert, but my job, and certainly as part of that, it would really be in terms of how to mobilize the organization. So that was how the journey started 2 years ago with working with Dr. Lowe and the Medicanja team and trying to start to look at the portfolio and try to look at also in terms of the industry. And I guess it's one of those things that we have to look at it and look at it on the lens of saying, what are you trying to achieve? All right. And the first thing in terms of when I look at it and I said, okay, even outside of just making this as a quick transition, there has to be a purpose to why am I doing this? All right. Purpose that I have to connect with in terms of to say, why is it important to me? And the thing that struck me was that we have medicinal product that have been created here, have been approved by the Ministry of Health of Jamaica, but yet there is this huge stigma around how to get it out, the regulations. There's the biggest hurdle we face getting financing, and that's partly because of the correspondence banking. And the reality is that there is, and I've been part of many discussion groups and panels in terms of as the industry. And I know there's a tendency to blame the local bankers, but I'm not blaming because the reality is that we know that they're not going to make that change until the US make that change. All right. And so while we may say, yeah, we're an independent country, the reality is that global integration and that interrelatedness and that dependency on moving transactions through the US is
Sure.
there. And
Right.
so you have to then let's not waste your energy trying to beat up against it. What you have to do is to find what is your market, how do you then get this move, and so part of that it's where we have to start to look into different ways, and which is why when we trying to reach out and try to get partners, so certainly the person who introduced you to me, it's part of those conversation, and again he is in the financial space and in terms of the capital market.
Right.
And so it's part of those conversations, and really in terms of again it's when we can sit down together, and he's certainly an African in terms of but also in terms of just from Jamaican, and build that connection to say, look, it's not about trying to stereotype or put people in any bracket or so forth. I look at it from the perspective of saying that we have a mutual interest in terms of how can we work together? How can we ensure that what we're building is something that is going to help Jamaica, help his organization in terms of how he's gonna to move forward. And it's one of the vision for Dr. Lowe also is that he wants Medicanja to have that presence in Jamaica and to all have that be a part of he could have sold the company to anybody in terms because you already have formulations that are approved by the Ministry of Health, patent pending. But he wants that vision the vision he has for the company is for it to be anchored in Jamaica because
Mhm.
too many of our companies here, when I look at the Jamaican landscape, almost all of the major companies are foreign owned. And I'm not anti foreign, foreigners own, because they have their investment. They are looking at it from a strategic perspective. But there is that opportunity for us to try to build these brands and try to build that local organization that becomes part of that global community. And that's exactly part of the, your overall mandate in terms of what you're trying to achieve, to recognize that while you may belong to a locality, you're still a part of that global community. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you take what you have in terms of, in this sense, the products that we have, the science behind it, and I'll have to keep referencing Dr. Lowe because he has been researching these things for 50 years. And I don't think that if he was in some first world country, this man would have a whole lot more accolades behind him in terms of what it is that's there. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes we don't recognize the assets that we have in terms of people and the talent and the dedication for you to spend that much time creating products, formulations, trying to ensure in terms of you is that you are able to develop those into something that is a first thing of benefit to people and have that, and then you can talk about it. So I'm on this journey to help in that regard, and I was sold on it once I could make that connection to say it's not about firstly just making money. The part of it is that you do have proper medicinal products. When I looked at it, the statistics, glaucoma is the second leading cause of blindness in the world.
Yeah.
We have but here we have a product that helps with that. And when you look at it, but not only is it helpful, but you have it costs generally less than what when you go to the pharmacy and in terms of what
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
persons will buy other similar medication for. All right. How do we get those products? We have products for pain, lots of persons in huge amount of pain. And how do you then get them to understand that, yes, it may be cannabis, ganja, whatever the word you want to call it, marijuana, but at the same time, what you're looking for is that what is the medicinal benefit, right? How is this being also? Somebody's not just giving me a product that didn't go through some level of process and control, that I'm consuming a substance that I don't know whether or not I'm having too much THC or the level of minerals or benefits that is in it that is going to be of any use to me. So I think it's important when you look at it and say, okay, how do I help to bring these fantastic products in terms of that are there created for wellness that can benefit people, and to help to bring those to people to both. But but overall, you have to realize that there are lots of barriers. There's a barrier of navigating the financial
Mm-hmm.
circle of the bank in terms of making sure that you're getting to your customers, you're also getting supplies that it's not infringing in terms of doing anything that is going to compromise the people or the organizations along that chain. It's
Yeah.
ensuring that consumers are aware of the products and the benefits, but also in the medical community, there's a lot of work to be done in
Mm-hmm.
engaging the medical community, because there is just that fear. And even when you show science and facts and data around it, there are those persons who just have that stigma, and they won't
Right.
they don't want to be involved. And so you have to break that down through education, but also be patient and to understand that it's not going to happen overnight just like that.
Yeah.
It's also a journey for those persons, and it's in terms of how do we then ensure that we are part of that system that is not only going to make sure that you are giving people factual information, but you're also ensuring that they understand how to consume it, and
Right.
that not creating a problem for them on that side.
Right. 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 So I want to get a little bit more into some of that science, but I want to take a chance to ask you about local speak, because you mentioned, the global, local. I love that. So this is where I ask my guests to share what you hear. So I ask you to share a word, a phrase, or a saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience, and why or how you came to value it as global speak.
All right. In Jamaica, one of our sayings is always saying that we're little but we're talented. It's part of that because they say you're small but you're powerful. All
Uh,
right. And I think in terms of, you'll hear that from a lot of persons who saying, look, you don't have to be well endowed, have the most resource, have the most in it, because most of the, well, I can say most of, but certainly a lot of those Jamaicans who get to higher heights, and in terms of, if you look at it, a lot of those persons come from humble beginnings. I mean, if you
Mm,
look at it, people always talk about Bob Marley, but Bob
mm,
Marley was in the ghetto of Trenchtown in Jamaica before he became this global superstar. But it really speaks to that. If you need to recognize that despite your own local challenges and the lack of resources, you can, by through applying yourself, become bigger than what you are in terms of, and become part of that global experience, and how you engage in terms of, go out there. And when you're engaging persons, because when I go out and I'm engaging persons from New York, or parts of the US, or in the UK, about Medicanja, I'm not projecting that, hey, we're from Jamaica, and in terms of, we're projecting that, look, this is what we can do, and this is what we're going to do in terms of what is that. And I think that is part of it. But certainly from Jamaica, our culture is very strong, and I think in terms of that, I listen to a lot of reggae music, but certainly also in terms of dancehall, part of it in terms of the energy, and it depends on the mood that I'm in or what I'm trying to achieve. I will listen to it. So there are times when you need more energy, and yeah, I'm just there in terms of playing in the background, but certainly. Traditionally, I would certainly listen to like Buju Banton in terms of, and even a lot of the African mix is very popular
yeah,
now
yeah,
in terms of the Jamaican mix, in terms of having that experience. But
yeah.
certainly I would say that that phrase resonates with me in terms of little but the taller, because it connects you, and you can see how that becomes part of a lot of persons' global experience. In terms of saying, you may started out in one area with limited resources, or coming from a humble beginning,
Yeah.
but there's no limitation in terms of how you can end up engaging other persons and being able to be part of those global conversations.
Nice. Nice.
So yeah, so
Yeah. I like that. It kind of dovetails with my mindset hack question. So, as since we're on that track, let me ask you that. So,
mhm.
what is your favorite or innovative mindset hacks? This is one that you already practice or one that you can imagine.
Well, I certainly, in terms of the mindset, I said I use music sometimes to get me in the zone.
Ah, okay.
But all right, but I have this, and again, I remember I think it was in 2010 or thereabout. I was part of a group that was sent on a breakthrough intensive as part of a leadership training program, working with as part of the Diageo at the time. All right. At the time, we went through this. You have to get to know yourself, know in terms of, and one of the things after that program that I started doing and I recognize is, it comes back to connecting to my understanding your why. Why do you want to do this?
Mhm,
All right.
mhm.
And if you can connect that to why is it important to me, then I really don't have a challenge motivating myself to do it. But certainly in terms of, when you're in that slum, or sometimes you're like, oh, do I really need to get out of bed to do this? It
Mhm.
is a situation where I usually look at it and say, okay, all right, if you don't do this, what is the, how is it? And I beat upon myself more than anybody else. And
Mm,
so I would say, okay, well, you made a commitment, to do this. So even looking at this, the cannabis industry, and I said, wow, before I came in, I didn't envision this kind of challenge, because there was so much hype on some of the things around it. You figure that, yes, it wouldn't be perfect, but you would have had a smoother road, or a less bumpy road to travel.
mhm.
But one of the things that you have to look at is that, and how I look at it is that I made a commitment to do it, and it's one thing in terms of making a commitment. And if you have to be able to look yourself and say, okay, did I do my best at it? Because if I believe I did my best and it's real, I am fine with moving to the next thing. I'm
Mm,
not that type of person who just look at it because and said, okay, fail, because no business, no organization achieve the heights without people taking a chance, and people trying to push the bound, well, people to pushing their personal boundaries, to say, how can I achieve that? And if I achieve this, how do I go to high heights in terms of what is there,
Mhm.
and it's part of that. Usain Bolt could have quit racing from when he did Beijing, but no, because there were more records to be broken, and it's part of that. You have to be able to challenge yourself and to say, hey, how do I get to a higher level or to achieve more out of it? That part of it, and it's part of also that transition. You say, okay, I didn't believe that in terms of it was something going to be phenomenal, continuing in corporate, in corporate Jamaica in terms of doing that, and which is why I said, okay, it's not about wanting to leave or being upset with persons. It's a matter of saying, how do I go to something else that is going to motivate me and challenge me? And
Mm.
if I can if I can see that, then I am usually able to make that connection to say, okay, you must do this. And I will tell myself all the time, I said, you have to do it. You already made a commitment. Okay, what's the next option? This is what you want to do.
Sure.
And so, yeah, but I know in terms of there are lots of mindset, but that's to me how I sort of must do it. And I'm really, I'm more of a long term person than a short term. So I don't really judge myself on short term failures or gains
Mhm.
as such. But I mean, look at it, okay, what is it that I'm going to achieve within this time frame? And if I can see that journey continuing, then I can say, okay, yes, it's a setback to today, but it's, we'll find a way to get around this, or that create an experience to deal with the next obstacle in this particular way.
Got it.
So, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, speaking of long term, what is the next step? What is the long term trajectory for Medicanja in terms of, particularly in terms of looking at international markets? Because I think that one of the things that Jamaica does and has done extremely well is exporting culture, music, styles. So, as I want to say, the first country to have legalized it, is that am I correct? I feel like as a country,
As
Jamaica
well,
was the first to
as
legalize it.
certainly from a cultural perspective, with Rastafarianism and
Right,
marijuana in terms of
right.
using, in that we have certainly been part of that and being part of that pioneering group of people who have brought recognition to it.
Hmm.
Because it was certainly stigmatized, and persons, who are used the plant was jailed, and a number of things. So it's very strong in terms of what is there. Now, from to speak down in my discussion, how I look at the industry, there are different groups. There are those persons who want to just grow and consume,
Yeah.
grow and export, grow and just produce the extract the oils.
Hmm.
Where Medicanja sits is in the third tier of the organization, that we're largely in pharmaceutical, and I think that is where we
Hmm.
have to then look at it from the perspective of saying, you have to identify, and I think that's what we did, was to say, do we belong? Because when I came on board, we were in retail, we had a herb house, we have a spa, we did a therapeutics. And so part of that restructuring is to say, no, where is it? What anchors the organization? The organization was born out of the innovations and the products that were created in terms of what is there. And that is our strength, because in that group also is that we technically have a leg up
Yeah.
on the competition, because not many companies, the companies that are coming in now are largely growing. They haven't gone through that process to create products, create formats. They've gone through and do the trials that is necessary and the documentation to get it past the approve or get it approved through the Ministry of Health.
Hmm.
So what we're looking at, and certainly Medicanja is the only cannabis company that is what was admitted to the Export Max program. And it's a
Okay.
program that is led by the Jamaican government and with led by Jampro. And so, as part of that, we're working with the Jampro in terms of trying to identify how do we get exposure for the products internationally. How do we ensure that we're bringing back that linkage? But it's important, and it's as part of it to say it's important that Medicanja is anchored in Jamaica. We do recognize that there are some jurisdictions that it's nearly impossible, at least at this stage, to get into those to export because of the export regulations. But what is we have to do is to find partners, and find partners who have like mind and who are willing to work with us and support us. You have people who will call us, our organizations, and say, hey, we're interested, but we want it done here or there. you have to recognize that the biggest asset is the IP.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of that, if you give away your IP,
Mm-hmm.
then you're basically giving away the heart of the business
Yeah.
in terms of what is there. And
Mm.
so that is part of, in terms of making that global play, we have to recognize that we have to know what we have as the biggest value for the company. How
Mm-hmm.
do we anchor that in terms of ensuring, and of course, how do we ensure that we're supporting and anchored in Jamaica? So as part of that, we are in discussions with growers who to grow particular strains around what that best used in some of our products,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so we will build that backwards in terms of from the supply chain coming in. But
Mm.
also now we have what we're doing is working on the demand and that global play. And so as part of that, we have to recognize that there are lots of ways in which it's not about just trying to get a distributor. You have to ensure that you have the right imaging, the right messaging. The social media is huge, and digital technology in terms of how companies and brands are communicating their products. And so you have to establish that as part of it and try to ensure that when you are communicating with or trying to get consumers in other parts of the world, you're anchoring it there. It's coincidental that you're an anchor because we recently got a company from Ghana actually reached out to us around
Okay.
one of the product line, and we're in discussions there. But again, it's how do we get that product from Jamaica, to,
Right.
to Ghana, and because there are no clear
Yeah.
shipping lanes that move from Jamaica to Ghana. But
Yeah.
again, certainly at this stage, you have to think globally. How does the logistics of that work, right? And not just that, yeah, I can send a few boxes, but how do you build it into this and making sure that you're planning with long term in mind?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't rush the system and create a problem at this stage, you want to
Mm-hmm.
ensure that also those partners they are established in the market. They are really well intended on doing what they tell you that they want to do, and how is it that both of you connect, in terms of making sure that that is part of it, that journey. And as part of that journey in the UK, we have gone through several hurdles because also as you start to have those conversations, you realize that and you recognize that not everybody who comes to you first mean that makes the best partners. And so
Yes.
sometimes you have to go back and look again because it's part of that story where you want to establish a company and brands that are going to be there long term. And long term really has to you have to anchor that and you have to build a foundation for that. And so rushing it sometimes, it is not the best option. But also you have to recognize that you have somewhat of a limited resources in terms of what you're doing. We are certainly trying to find partners in investment, partners in building out supply chain, partners in building out in terms of market exposure or in terms of communication in particular markets. Because one, we can't just think that one global message is going to fit everybody.
Right.
We have to look at each jurisdiction. And like I said, that it's coincidental that we'll reach out. So therefore, we have to then look at what is happening in Ghana. How is it that if we're going to enter that market, how do we need to show up in that market?
Mm-hmm.
Because we can't use that same message that we're going to use in New York as
Yeah.
part of that message,
Right.
and so to me, in terms of building it, the company, building it with that long-term play in mind, and not trying to just cut corner, but to certainly ensure that we are anchoring this company, and we want to see, is that we may start out very small or start out in terms of from a small island on a, or from a global perspective, but we are intending on trying to get to be a big player and try to get into how is it that when people say Medicanja, they're like, wow, just like how when I go places and I feel proud when people hear about Red Stripe because I know that I may not be there still, but I contributed a lot to that organization in terms of that revamping, in terms of where it was. So I want for Medicanja when I go out, I can hear a person say, just like how I tell people that I used to be working with Red Stripe. People say, "Oh yeah, Red Stripe, great beer," and they like it and stuff like that. I want people to say, "Hey, Medicanja, yes, fantastic products. My mother, my aunt had glaucoma, and I use your product. It is fantastic." Or my cousin had seizures, and this is what they're using now to help to relieve my seizures. Or I was in so much pain, and I'm using this product now, and wow, I can't. I'll give you one instance in terms of that. I have an aunt who is in New York, and I can tell you in terms of she tried. We have a product called Kanja Rub, which is a healing oil from Jamaica. So it's initially designed to help with arthritis or muscular pain, and but I can tell you one of the feedback. So she used the product and she was very much in terms of before the winter month finished, she sent to me and said, "Hey, I need to stock up because next winter, I said, okay, what is it?" And she gave me a powerful insight. She said, when she applied the oil to her leg, and especially in the winter months, it kept her warm. And I was like, wow. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. It started to bring me back to remember in terms of, I said that I was a red job in terms of that understanding insights in terms of from the consumer perspective and to see okay what it is, but that certainly create an aha moment because we recognize that it's not only about just healing just the physical pain, but it's also based on the ingredients
Yeah.
help to keep the leg warm. And she was like, wow. She said, well, when I rub it on my leg, I just put on my tights and I can walk around. Whereas before there are some nights she has to be cloak up at blankets and layers on top of layers and she can't. So again, it's trying to build into that and understanding those insights. That may be something that we can use to help to promote the product in cooler climates.
Right.
But it wouldn't be probably relevant in Ghana. It's not going to be relevant in Jamaica.
Right.
All right. So
yeah, interesting. Yeah. So I'm imagining it's part of the circulation. Like her circulation is that much more robust with it. So anyone who just has generally circulation challenges would probably do well with the product. So how can our listeners get your products? Are they available outside of Jamaica? How will that work?
Okay, so from our products, we do have in terms of the primary thing that they can get us at MedicanjaJamaica.com. We do have our website set up there, or you can email us at info@MedicanjaJamaica.com.
Okay, and I'll put that in the show.
Yeah, it depends on where you are. We do have a person, a retailer in the US who sell the product. And we do have we're doing market testing now in the UK, so we should be in the UK later this year. But we're doing the market testing, and we have a distributor there who is engaging retailers around the product there.
Okay, great.
UK. So we're having those conversations, and with some luck, we could be in Ghana soon.
Sounds right.
But certainly, what we're doing it in a measured way.
Sure.
We have interest from all over the world in terms of persons who want to get access to the product. And so we do have persons who, even from the other Caribbean islands, and we send it to them. We just, so they can order from us directly and we send it. But usually in territories where we have representatives, we will then direct them to those persons in terms of the interest.
Got it. Great.
Yes,
great. So this is where I like to kind of take a little bit of a turn and try to get to know a little bit more about you. We've learned a lot about you, but get to know more about you. You mentioned you listen to music as your mindset hack. Are you a big reader? Can you tell us some of the things that you've been reading lately?
I'm not sure if I am the biggest reader, but I do read quite a bit. I do have a bias for Malcolm Gladwell, Gladwell's books, and part of it is that his literature it always end up giving you a different perspective from what you originally think. The last of his books that I read was the one with where he talked about the story of David and Goliath. And in terms of traditionally, you heard, David slew Goliath and stuff like that. But it's part of that in terms of understanding, what are some of the other things that could have happened in terms of why that story turned out the way it did, and in terms of trying to. So I do like his literature, and it's the same thing in terms of when you look at some of his other, the blink and the tipping point and so forth. You get that different perspective of why is it that in a community where if you clean all the walls and you let the place look decent, that people behave differently from a community in which there's just dirt and graffiti all over the place. Why is it that people naturally just act different based on how the environment look and how is it that they feel about it? And it's one of those things. And if you really look, internalize it, you'll realize that it's the same thing. You have a new car and you act different with that car when it's new.
Yeah.
Versus when it's old and worn. You said, they get a scratch, it's going to get very dirty.
Right.
You treat it that way. And so I like those type of literature where it gives you a different perspective on things, and you don't see things for just what is on the surface.
Yeah.
I try to, but I generally do read quite a bit. I'm a fan also in terms of Jim Collins, in terms of the books like Good to Great and Built to Last. Because those are part of also because those books not only do they help you personally, but it's also part of that business mindset training.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, you realize that companies that have a long-term vision of how they want to do things, generally, yes, you're going to have a lot of companies going to come up and look fantastic in day one and year two. But how do they have that long-term vision and how they're going to survive in the long term? So my reading in terms of a lot of that is around. But I do listen to also in terms of different podcasts. I just recently I became a fan of yours as well because you really have interested recordings and your thing. So I've been listening to a few of them. It's really and congratulations because it's really good and the way in which you interact. That. It gave me some comfort coming on your program.
Good.
That okay, I was coming on, and it was gonna be a friendly environment.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much for joining me today, and I think you really made my 420 episode a really great experience in terms of just enlightening listeners on the business of what's to come. So I really, really appreciate that. Do you have any last words for our listeners?
I would say certainly in terms of listenership, I would always say to people is that it's good to want things, but you have to be prepared to work for it. And I think in terms of and just like how you're engaging your audience, I do have a couple of people who I provide a mentor to us and provide vision. And it's one of those messages that I always tell that you have to have that vision of yourself, but don't expect things to come overnight. And sometimes, especially when you're starting from behind the line, in terms of, you have to be prepared and recognize that you're going to have to be a bit more patient, but also you can't be too patient,
right.
But you have to be able to say, okay, what do I want to achieve down the road? And I think that's, for me, that's the mantra that I work with, and that's what I would want to say to your audience. But certainly, I wish everyone well and be safe as we navigate the coronavirus and the global pandemic. We're having our issues here in Jamaica, but not as bad as some places. So certainly, people just have to be vigilant and try to be safe at all times.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So listeners, this has been another episode of the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around doing something in the world. Every Tuesday, we have new episodes, and you can catch us at www.glocalcitizenspod.com and wherever you get your podcasts. And do us a favor and subscribe, like, share, leave a comment or a review, particularly on Apple Podcasts, because that helps people find us and the content that we're putting out. So until next time, listeners, bye for now.